Well, large crowds have been gathering again on the streets of Myanmar's commercial capital, Yangon, as they protest against the military authorities who seized power just over 2 weeks ago. A nationwide civil disobedience campaign has been underway since the overthrow of Aung San Suu Kyi's government. People taking to the streets and civil servants also being urged to strike. They hope that the turnout today will be the largest so far. That's just a day after Aung San Suu Kyi herself appeared in court via video link to face a further charge, this time of breaking national disaster law. Let's speak to our Southeast Asia correspondent, Jonathan Head, who's been monitoring all this from the start. Jonathan, it does look, I mean, the latest pictures we've seen are of really vast numbers gathering, but we do hear of confrontations with police as well.
There have been some, David, nothing too serious yet. In other places, the police have been somewhat baffled by the tactics of the protest movement, as people have basically parked their cars to block roads, pulled their bonnets up and claimed that their cars are broken down. It's called the broken down car movement. That's to block the roads to try and stop people going to work and to stop the security forces from moving people in. I've seen policemen arguing with people, claiming that they can start their cars. I mean, this is taking place in lots of different bits of Yangon itself, with very large numbers of people gathering right in the centre of Yangon, but in at least 18 to 20 other towns and cities too. There are big protests in Naypyidaw, which is, of course, the military-built capital, the stronghold of the current government, and the heart of the civil service. And this is all about trying to stop government from functioning. The civil disobedience movement has sort of evolved, and it's a lot more organised now. You can see signs of that in the way that people are sort of sorting themselves out as they come into the city to try to stop people from going to work and to show that they won't go to work, in the hope of making the country ungovernable, at least making public services come to a halt. And I think this big showdown today, which is a direct response to the news that Aung San Suu Kyi was somewhat secretly and hastily put on trial yesterday, that's really sparked off a much bigger protest. They want a big show of strength to show their feelings. The military has constantly claimed that the reason for its coup was that the outgoing government lost its legitimacy because of its failure to investigate fraud. And what the protesters are showing is, look, we all voted for Aung San Suu Kyi in huge numbers last November, and we're going to come out and support her now that she's facing these rather ridiculous charges.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of numbers, though, Jonathan, it feels like it's not just a momentum. It's almost like a tipping point, isn't it, at which you wouldn't want to be a union not coming out in support of all the others.
Yeah, I think there'll be a lot of pressure on people not to go to work, and that's been the argument. The military has tried to claim that the civil disobedience movement has been driven by intimidation. I mean, that's not realistic. There is strong pressure on people not to go to work, and I've no doubt there is some intimidation, but the groundswell of anger about this coup, this sense of injustice, is really what's driving people. And this is the 12th day they've done these protests. It affects people's livelihoods. People are willing to sacrifice a great deal, including almost the collapse of health services in places, because it was doctors and medical workers who started this idea of non-cooperation with the military regime. Banking services have almost stopped functioning, so people are running out of cash. People are really going to suffer economically because of this protest, and yet the numbers are still very, very big. And I think that's a real problem for the military government. They've deployed a lot of soldiers, but you can't really try and corral protests when they don't have a central point of organisation. They're organised locally, and when they break out in so many different places. There's no real strategy at the moment from the government about how to contain this. And that feared, violent crackdown that everyone keeps in mind because it's what the military has done in the past is much, much harder to do when you've got cameras everywhere. All of this stuff's been live streamed. They haven't dared to shut down the internet completely during the day, and where it's so fragmented as well. It's a much more modern style of protest than we've seen in the past.
OK, Jonathan, thanks very much indeed for that, the very latest there from Yangon in particular. Now, James Rodehaver is the head of the Myanmar team at the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights in Bangkok. I spoke to him a short while ago. In fact, we focused to start with on just what Jonathan was talking about, the broken car protest, using those stalled cars effectively to block roads. What did he think of that?
Well, I think that it's quite ingenious. I think that the variety of ways that such a large, massive number of people, particularly coming from the grassroots, their different tactics in peacefully demonstrating and expressing their opinion have been really admirable.
Admirable is one word. You must be anxious, presumably, that this cannot go on forever without the military taking a heavier hand.
Well, of course, this military has a very long history of violent crackdowns and violent responses to public demonstration and to quashing free expression. So yes, we're very deeply concerned about the way that things have been going in recent days, the increasing resort to the use of force, even if non-lethal force. It's still unacceptable, unlawful to use force against peaceful protests. And yet, despite that, the protests persist, and they persist in their peaceful nature.
Right. Aung San Suu Kyi appeared via video link in court on Tuesday. I guess your concerns there are that this is going to be a very long period of incarceration, even if it's about the court proceedings going ahead.
Well, of course, yes, we are very concerned and in some ways confused by the charges that have been leveled against the state councillor and the president. I think that what we fear gets lost sometimes are the massive number of other people that have been detained during these last 2.5 weeks. My team has, at this point, compiled a list of over 547 individuals that have been detained, largely incommunicado. And what that has meant is that they have no access to a lawyer in many cases. In almost all cases, it's hard to know where they're being held. The fear is that these may cease being unlawful detentions and become enforced disappearances.
James, can I ask you, what I might call the partial democratisation of Myanmar, the electoral success of Aung San Suu Kyi, the embracing of this country by the international community, brought with it, of course, a tacit understanding that the military still had a very strong hand within the running of the country. When you look at where we are today and the way this has emerged, was it a mistake to buy that line?
Well, it's always hard to know for certain, how to handle an analysis like that. Looking backwards, you're always going to have 20/20 hindsight. I think the one thing is clear, and that's that this current crisis is born of impunity. It's the fact that for years people have known that the Tatmadaw needed to be brought under civilian control, the way it is in every other democracy in the world. And that will be the key to stabilizing the country.